Hello, my name is Alexander LaFontaine, and today we'll be looking at a full sport analysis for hockey. Just an introduction, ice hockey evolved from various stick and ball games during the 1700s. The aim essentially is to score more points than the other team, and it's essentially 6 players per team. They have the one goalkeeper that protects the goals, 2 wings, 2 defensive men, and 1 center. These 5 wings, defensemen, and center essentially are skating around in both an offensive and defensive position, meaning they'll do both offensive and defensive movements, but the main focus is defense men stay more back, the wings and center may go more forward, but they're always still trying to interchanging between both types of jobs. So 3 periods of 20 minutes for men is a total normal match, and for women it's anywhere from 12 to 15, so it's a little bit less. So just to look at physical demands, some of the research showed that mean HR max can go anywhere to around 200 BPM, the average HR 165.6 BPM, and mean intensity around 82.5% HR max. One thing that research did show is the level intensity changes a lot when it comes to an actual game versus practice, meaning in practice, the players, though they are still training and moving, they tend to go a little slower as the demand is not so high. So we see with practice intensity 68.6% of their HR max, while in a game, which is higher stakes and there's more incentive, it does increase a lot more to 81.9, almost 82%. So when it comes to the forwards and defense, one thing that happens a lot in hockey is that there's what's called shifts. So essentially, after a period of time, we have here average play time for a forward is 58 and for a defense would be 66. So after that 58 to 66 seconds, the player on the actual ice will shift. Essentially, they will go back in while another player takes up their job. And that happens periodically throughout the actual entire match itself. So average of the shifts for the forwards is around 15.9, almost 16 shifts overall. And then for defense, average around 20 shifts. So the defense does tend to play a little longer, but they tend to have a little more actual shifts. And then the average time between the shifts for the forwards is 282.25 seconds, while the defense is 192. So forwards tend to play a little less and they shift less often, but then the times between the shifts is a lot longer compared to defense. So again, the players alternate with other players in shifts to allow for recovery. Forwards average play time in total around 20.7 minutes. Again, less shifts, longer rests in between. While for the defense, average play was around 28 minutes. They did have more shifts more often, but shorter rests in between. And the time after a shift was average between anywhere from 81 to 88 seconds. Again, we're talking about defensive men. There's the 2 defensemen, and then the forwards would be the 2 wings and the center. So those can be interchanged. Then we looked a bit more research at some of the actual physiology. VO2 max levels is around 58.6, relative peak power about 13.1, vertical heights, which they tested this counter movement jump, 41.5, and then repeat skate sprints 14.7 for around 89 meters. Now, a big difference that we're going to see here versus a regular field-based sport or even field hockey is literally the terrain. On the ice, it's not just forward and back that you would think with running with, you got to bring the leg up and strike down. There's a lot more side-to-side movements and a lot more, even in the picture we can see here, there's a lot more hip abduction and hip adduction and frontal plane movements when it comes to getting around on the actual ice. And we'll start seeing how that affects in terms of common injuries as well as areas we want to focus on for these types of athletes. KPIs, work capacity, again, every sport is going to have an anaerobic measurement to it, so increasing the lactate threshold and buffering capacity is important. Again, there's a lot of breaks in the shifts, so having a VO2 max very high will also be helpful to assist in recovery. Acceleration, agility, acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, there's a lot of quick movements in hockey, and you got to be quick to be able to go to wherever it is you need to go and then stop and potentially change. Repeat skate sprint ability, max velocity, accelerations with varying rest lengths, Power and strength, we need force production, but strength in all planes of motions. And all planes of motion is very, very crucial for a sport like this, where again, as we saw before, and even the picture here, there's a lot of abduction and adduction type movements and positions these players are in. Even the goalkeeper, as this picture shows. So we look at common limitations in men's competition. The injury rate's around 53 per thousand. Research said that it's because again there's a longer game time, but it's also because the competitions tend to be a lot more often. There's more tournaments, more games, and things of that, so there's more chance of injury. For women's, it was around 20 per thousand hours. Men tend to suffer more leg injuries. Women suffered more head injuries, most common being things like concussions, which again, there is a bit of an impact. And if you've seen the sport, crashing does happen a lot. And then adductor strains, so going back to that frontal plane. And then MCL sprains, again, the MCL and adductors essentially work together. They're, the MCL's up here, the adductors are down here. They're essentially on the inside of the leg, so they do kind of work hand in hand together. Information for success, we want to increase the power and the strength. Again, we're also looking at the ability to, acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, that agility, quickness, frontal plane strength and mobility, making sure that there's mobility in the frontal plane movements and strength to be able to limit and prevent, the common injuries that we saw from the MCL and the adductor strains. Field and ice-based agility. So again, there's a difference between running on the field and skating and being able to train both of them. So essentially having a day in the week or a certain season, part of the season, a phase where, okay, we're going to be doing field-based exercises, running, acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, getting that and is not only going to improve the ability on the ice, but it's also going to strengthen, the joints and the muscles in ways that these skaters may not necessarily do. Plus, if you're used to the terrain on the grass and the ice, there's a lot more proprioception that's created because of the differences in those terrains. And then, of course, VO2 max, very important. Again, during the shifts, which happen a lot, there's a time to recover. And if a high VO2 is there, the athlete's going to be able to, as soon as his shift is over and he goes back in, be as explosive and quick as necessary. Training strategies, training power and speed, training adductors and abductors. Those movements are very important from like, the glute med, TFL, and then all the adductor muscles, getting those strong and nice. Some supplementing field-based work with ice agility work, it doesn't always have to be necessary that we're in the field running, but having some of those in mix with the ice runners work. And then of course, improving VO2 max, whether it could be repeat skate sprints or repeat sprints on the field. Now looking at a sample macro from the NHL, off-season is June to September. Preseason will be late September, early October, and then in season from October to April. So the season lasts for a pretty good while. For off-season, GPP, general prep phase, just getting the athletes accustomed to what they're going to be doing, how they're going to be moving, being able to be stable so that we can load them heavier, make them go faster. Agility and glycolytic, we want to get that agility up. Hypertrophy strength, there's a lot of collisions and it happens. So getting them not only strong to withstand, but also, bigger necessarily could be better. They do wear a lot of padding and stuff, but making them bigger and stronger is going to be a lot more beneficial. Then preseason, some power strength, agility, change of direction, power glycolytic, really focusing on heavier power, heavier movements, getting them ready and also speed. And then in season, we keep power always, strength always, reducing the actual volume, but still keeping the intensity, some endurance, and then more sport specific glycolytic work, not necessarily sprints, but maybe doing hitting the puck, for 10 times in a very short period of time, or doing certain movements, or maybe for the actual goalkeeper, it's being able to drop with the hips and abduction so that they're able to block a puck going between their legs, different variations. Now looking at workouts, this is an agility change of direction on the ice, acceleration 6 times for 30 yards, then doing some type of the 5x5x5, 4 sets, 2 sets left, 2 sets right, working 180-degree change of direction, then the T-test, 2 sets left, 2 sets right, this time doing more 90-degree. And then off the actual ice, doing single leg jumps with iso holds, since there's a lot of change in direction already happening, one set that we are able to improve this ability in, again, not just sagittal plane of motion, but frontal, so left and right. So having a bit of a hold unilateral will also help strengthen that area. Workout two, just repeat sprint ability, but on the field, simple, some accelerations for shorter distance, then some sprints. We are essentially going all out, but at the same time, we look at a 1.4, so the main focus is being able to just keep repeating. Workout three, a power strength, hand cleans, 4x4, rotational, medicine ball, oblique throws. So again, when it comes to hitting the puck, there's a lot of rotation involved. So being able to strengthen that movement to be able to be a lot stronger would help. Some Bulgarians for unilateral work, bench press to be able to strengthen, again, the pushing motion. And then Copenhagen's special exercise for concentric and isometric strength in the adductors, and we'll see a little bit more about this specific exercise. Then workout four, power glycolytics, some power cleans, counter movement jumps. This exercise, lateral lunge with plate adduction, we're going to see a little more about it as well. Again, working that frontal plane, and then some glycolytic work with puck shots, hit 10 pucks as fast as you can, and then, if it takes 10 seconds, 20-second rest, so that repeating that over and over. Now looking at specific exercise, Copenhagen's exercise emphasis on strengthening adductors through isometric and concentric tension to stabilize hips and legs. Lots of frontal plane movements of skating with speed of hip, ab, and adduction being crucial. And uses a strength exercise of around 12 to 15 for the contralateral hip flexion, contralateral hips flex while maintaining the ipsilateral leg extended. And here's just a quick video of it, keeping the hip and the body nice and straight while I flex the knee. Now the lateral lunge with plate slide, it emphasizes on lateral movements mimicking the skate biomechanics, unloaded hip adduction with loaded hip adduction when moving the plate. You can use as a strength endurance base, 8 to 12, maybe with a heavier load of 5 to 8. And then here, as you see, lunge to the side, and then the other leg will adduct, bringing the weight. And then the same thing, I'll lunge to one side, adductor, bringing the weight. And then the last one, a single leg jump with iso hold, emphasis on stability and power production unilaterally. Skating requires a lot of frontal plane stability, so strengthening the joints in the frontal plane will reduce the adductor and MCL injuries. You can use it as a finishing, stabilizing exercise for an agility day, 1 to 2 sets, emphasize on that stable hold after landing, 1 to 2 second hold. And then here we can see, want to jump, hold, and be able to go before you go to the next one. Now, in conclusion, hockey is a demanding sport that requires quickness and excellent conditioning. Numerous breaks for players during the shifts. Having a high VO2 will be very helpful. Areas to improve: frontal plane strength, power and speed, VO2 max, buffering capacity and strength. And then working to improve proprioception with some field work supplementation will increase overall force production when accelerating the ice, and again, reduce the chance of the strains and injuries. Now for a little quiz. Question 1. Hockey is a team sport made up of how many players? 4, 3, 10, or 6? Question 2. The players known as skaters are called what? And list them. Defensemen, wings, offenders, center. Remember, they all have different names. Question 3. How many minutes is a period for men? 30, 20, 14, or 28? How many minutes is considered a period for women? 10, 20, 25, 15? The mean intensity percent of an HR max for a game is average around what? 100, 90, 75.5, 82.5. True or false? So defensive men have more shifts compared to the forwards. Which location is the most injured for men? Next question, which location is most injured for women? Which ligament is most affected in the knee? And true or false? Compared to running, skating has less frontal plane movements. So thank you very much. That was my sport analysis on hockey, and goodbye.